Hey everybody, Charlie Stevens here. Thank you so much for tuning in to another guitar lesson. Today I'd like to talk about bass walks, what they are and how we can use them to connect chords that we're playing in songs. So this is a really cool concept. So I had been aware of bass walks from a lot of classic rock tunes that I'd played. They're sort of built into the song, a song like No Woman, No Cry. Song like that sort of has these bass walking ideas in it, so it wasn't a foreign concept to me. But I hadn't really dug into it in the way that I'm going to explain it to you until I had gotten into jazz. So in jazz, the way that I understood the rule was basically we're going to put quarter note bass notes. And when we land on the new chord at the beginning of the measure, we want the root of that chord right on beat 1. So for instance, in that example I was playing a G13 to a C9, very fancy chords, so I don't expect you to know these, but I went from G to C basically. Okay, so we're not going to get into all that. Down the road we can talk about more jazz walking bass lines. But anyway, that's kind of how I started thinking about this concept, is that you can basically do whatever you want. Any note that you want is okay, but you just have to plan out how to put enough quarter notes so when you get to the note that you're targeting, in this case I was going from G to C, right? So when I get to that C, I really want that to be on beat 1. Right when I get to the measure where the C chord happens, right? So the stuff that happens before that is almost a little bit arbitrary, okay? It's sort of my choice. I can actually do whatever I want, but the idea is to lead up and make it sound interesting when I land on C, okay? So we're going to look at a few ways of doing that from a normal G to C, not in really a jazz context. This is more of in a bluegrass style. So in bluegrass, we do this a lot when we're connecting our chords, okay? And this is one of the benefits to the boom chuck pattern or the bass strum pattern, in my opinion, because if I'm just doing a regular strumming pattern, maybe that sounds okay to throw in a bass note, but it kind of comes out of nowhere, right? If I'm doing my boom chuck thing, I already have a bass voice. That's already part of the song that didn't come out of nowhere. I was going bass chord, bass chord, bass, 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 bass. Right? So it didn't come out of nowhere. I already have the bass line sort of as part of the music, and then instead of just throwing in all these chords after every other bass note the way we do in our boom chuck, I can replace some of those chord strums with extra bass note as I create motion towards a definite arrival point. Okay? In this lesson, we're only going to look at G going to C. Okay? So G is our starting point. C is our arrival point. Okay? So different ways to do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going from the 1 to the 4, okay? This is in the G major scale. Please watch my lesson on how to play the G major scale in open position, because that's kind of what we're going to do when we do this. Well, instead of just going right from G to C, well, how did I know I can go? How did I know I could add in those notes? Well, those are the notes of the G major scale. I just walked right through them, okay? So that's what we're going to do in our first example. So in example number 1, we have a measure of just regular boom chuck with our alternating bass. Okay, then we get half a measure of this because we only have 3 notes. We want to land here on beat 1. So 3, 4, that would put us on 4, right? So we have to be a little bit creative with this. We're going to do half a measure of boom chuck now. 1, 2, and then we'll go 3, 4, 1. And we'll just end on C now. It'd probably eventually go back to G. I'm kind of thinking about this as if we were in the key of G, but in this case it doesn't matter. There's a G chord in the key of C as well. So if we were in the key of C and we were playing a G chord, we could use these walks to go to a C. as well. But I'm kind of thinking about them as G. We are ending on C just to keep these really simple, okay? So in example number 1, we have boom chuck, half a boom chuck, and then on 3-4 we play open A on 3, the B note on the 2nd fret, and boom. Okay, I hope that's making sense, and we're basically just kind of connecting the dots a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. A little bit more interesting. Here it is with just a boom chuck, and then I'll put it in with that little walk, and you can hear the difference. Now I'll put that little walk in. Okay, why don't we try that together nice and slow. This is example number 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, great. Example number 2 is a slight variation of this, okay? Instead of going boom, chalk, 3, 4, I'm going to do boom, boom. Okay, so basically I'm replacing the strum on beat 2. So in the second measure, we had a bass note on beat 1, we had a strum on beat 2, and then we had bass notes on 3 and 4. I'm going to leave beat 1 exactly the way it was. I'm going to leave beats 3 and 4 exactly the way they were. I'm just going to replace that strum. Instead of that strum, I'm just going to double this note, even easier. Okay, sometimes you'll want that sound. It sounds nice as well. Let's hear how that sounds and play it together, please. Example number 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. Great job. Okay, that was example number 2. Now, in that example, we either had to double or we had to add a strum. We could not just go through the major scale, the G major scale, because we'd get where we're going too early. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's why we had to double up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we can go through the scale. Okay, but there's actually another way to do this too, because a scale, a major scale, does not have all of the notes in it. When we're talking about all of the notes available to us, we call that the chromatic scale. When we're talking about a major scale, we've intentionally omitted some of those notes, okay, to make sure that we're in the key of G. That's what being in the key of G means. It means some notes are present, some are not. So basically what that means is we're leaving gaps in there. We have notes in our scale, but there are actually other notes in between some of these notes as well, okay? So what we're going to do with this walking bass thing is we're going to add them in there too. By one way of thinking, this breaks a rule or something because we're not supposed to have these notes in the key of G. But by another way of thinking, it follows a rule because we're actually allowed to do whatever we want as long as we play quarter notes and we make a motion towards a definite arrival point, right? Like I explained before, in this case from G going to C. So if I'm using all quarter notes and I'm making my way from G to C, that is going to be fair game, even though one of these notes is not technically allowed. So now I'm going to go 1, 2. I'm going to fill in the gaps here. So I went to the G, then I go to the open A next, right? Usually I would go to the 2nd fret because we don't have the 1st fret note in the key of G major. Nothing on that 1st fret, but 2, 3, 4, 1. If I add that in there, that helps the rhythm come out right, okay? It helps me land on C. Awesome, right? That is one of my favorite ones, okay? Just really cool. This note that we're adding, I can explain it away because of the rhythm thing, the way I just explained it. I think that's the best way to understand it. This happens to be a note that we can play in G all the time anyway. It ends up being the minor third of G, which we resolve to the major third most of the time. Helps us get our G run, basically. We haven't learned that quite yet on this channel. We'll check that out soon for sure. But anyway, that's a good note to know about. We also learned about this when we were learning the E blues scale. And we learned that the E blues scale was really the same thing as the G major pentatonic with a different blue note, the minor third, right? Anyway, lots of different things to talk about, so I don't want to get too carried away, taking us too far away from what we're working on right now, right? But just wanted to point out that this note is really good to know about in G. That gives us a little bit of flavor, and we'll definitely come back and talk about that, and I'll explain why and show you some licks on how you can use that. But just another way to remember, the secret note we're adding in that's not in our G major scale is worth knowing about, whether you're thinking about this bass walk idea or just other ideas that you want to throw this in. It's usually pretty cool in a lot of different contexts too. Anyhow, we're going to check out another example now. Well, let's do example number 3 together. So we have one measure of boom chuck, and then we have that hard drive up to the 4. I really like that. I hope you like the sound of that too. Let's try it together, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. Great job. Okay, so in the last example I want to show you in this lesson is kind of the same thing as that. Okay, you know how we had in example 3 we had one measure of boom chuck, so one measure of G. In our second measure of G, we did that, right? So we had 2 measures of G to work with. We did the boom chuck on one, the bass walk on the other, right? In this one, we're going to mix those together. We'll actually start our bass walk in that first measure of G, and we'll do it the same way. The exact same notes, that is. It's the same walk, but the rate of speed is going to be different, though, because I'm going to slip strums in between each one of those. Now that I've spread them out, so it used to be like 1, 2, 3, 4 over here. Now that I've spread them out, I'm going to put 1 on the first beat of the first measure. Then I'll put a strum on beat 2. Then I'll put the next note that we have on beat 3, strum on beat 4. Then I'll put the third note in this pattern, 1, 2, 3. That one will end up on beat 1 of the next measure. There'll be a strum. On beat 3, we'll get the next note in this sequence. Okay? It's kind of a mouthful to explain, so hopefully I didn't confuse you with my explanation for that. But if you look at the tab, you can see what's going on with that, hopefully, and you can get this demonstration too. But basically, I'm going to sneak a chord strum in between each one. Little bit tricky if you're brand new to guitar, so that one might be a little more advanced. I don't know. I like it. I use it a lot. Hopefully that sounds familiar to you and you end up using it too. So the distinction with this one is it is a 2 measure thing. All the other ones we looked at were hanging on G for however long, and then the measure before the C chord comes, that's when we start our walk. The important difference of example number 4, we have to start this 2 measures before the C chord happens. Okay, but again, that might be a little advanced. Take what you can from this, and as we continue on with this course, I'll show you some opportunities where we can use this, and hopefully it will make more sense as you go. All right, well, those are just a few things that I could think about from taking G to C. And really, you can be as creative as you want to be. There's a lot of different options that I didn't explore that you could try. That's actually the one I did in the intro. I didn't even really think about it that way. I went through the G arpeggio. Those are the 3 notes in the G chord. And that lands you on a D note. And we need to go to C. There's 1 note in between D and C. So that's what I did with the jazz context. An open position, kind of the exact same thing, works there too, right? I don't use that one as much when I play bluegrass and folk styles. I kind of use these other ones that I showed you more often when I do that. But my point is, you now understand the theory behind this. You're picking 1 note and you're going to another note, and Usually we do it in one measure. You can kind of do it in as many as you want, really, if you map it out correctly. But yeah, you can just plan a way to get there using quarter notes to create a sense of arrival to when you reach this bass note, and it will sound really cool when you get there. Alright, well thank you so much for watching. All these musical examples are available on my website, so please download those if you want to check them out and practice them at your own speed. And you can use these in all sorts of different songs. This is where the artistry comes into it. You can mix and match these and decide where you want to put these little pieces. Okay, so that can be the fun part of this. Alright, well that's G to C. Please join me in the next lesson and we'll learn how to get from C back to G. We'll also see what happens when C goes up to D, which is another common thing that happens in the key of G. Okay, well thanks again for watching. I look forward to seeing you in another lesson really soon. Bye.